It would seem from reports that came out yesterday and more corroborated today that the passengers that were aboard the cruise ship, the Hantavirus, that had Hantavirus, the Andes strain specifically, that can go from person to person, is now loose. They let them go from quarantine. Not all of them, but 5 of them. Hantavirus cruise ship quarantine. 5 passengers sent home. 13 remain in Nebraska facility. And these are the people that I talked about before at UNMC. 5 passengers from the Hantavirus cruise ship have been allowed to leave a secure quarantine facility in Nebraska and continue being monitored at home, but 13 remain in the facility, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services told HealthBeat on Monday. At least 2 of those that are released on home quarantine on Monday will be under around-the-clock monitoring and have been put under an official quarantine order, New York officials said. Multiple media outlets have reported that federal officials had wanted to require that state health departments ensure a police officer or a public health worker was stationed 24/7 outside the individual's home. That's an unusual step that may stigmatize people who have shown no signs of infection. But I think most of the public would probably agree with that, because if you have a situation where you're releasing 5 people, we don't know about the other places yet, right? This could still be spreading other places from other people that were traveling. But these 5 people alone could start a pandemic, or at least an epidemic here in the U.S., if they're allowed to interact with certain people enough. So if I was in the situation, or if it was my family, would I want to sit there and have an officer outside the house and I can't leave and I can't do anything if I felt fine? I probably wouldn't want that, but I would probably do that because I don't want to spread this around. Now, a lot of you were saying, and I don't agree with this, but they were saying that they should have firebombed the cruise line in the first place when this all happened. Officials did not answer questions about why some passengers are being allowed to leave after just 21 days. That's only 3 weeks. Now, for reference, this takes about 5 to 8 weeks for this to incubate in a person. That means that they could release them after 3 weeks, and 2 weeks after that, or even 3 weeks after that, they could get symptoms and they could spread this. The lack of transparency and inconsistency in the federal government's approach to managing potential public health risks on the wake of a deadly outbreak of Andes hantavirus is drawing concern from legal experts and public health officials. Now, this is something I talked to Dr. Schwelt, Dr. Roger Schwelt. We did an off-script episode and we spoke about several different things. We talked about light and his 8 pillars of health, but we also specifically talked about hantavirus and Ebola virus and kind of some of what to expect and some of the risks and things that might be coming. So make sure you guys check that out. That video will be down in the description. But the big takeaway is most people agree that this is not going to be some huge epidemic, some huge pandemic, but there may be some initial contacts and initial contact deaths, especially with Ebola. But now with hantavirus specifically, with them releasing them early, there's no way they would know if they're going to spread this later or if they're going to be symptomatic later. So this is kind of a big deal. But this is one of the main issues. They're saying that quarantining a person is a massive infringement of civil liberties and must be done using a clear and science-based process. I do not think the administration is acting in a transparent and rational fashion. So yes, they should have civil liberties and it must be scientific. But is it scientific to release someone after just 3 weeks of quarantine when the incubation period can be up to 8 weeks? That's the real question. And to the people, they're saying, well, if they're going to sit at home for 24/7 surveillance, or at least be required to stay in their home, how do you enforce that? And an even bigger question, should that be enforced? Does that infringe on that person's rights? And so far, health officials in multiple countries have identified 10 additional cases, and they were all among the 150 passengers that were on the ship. So as far as I can tell, and as far as I've heard from other sources that I talked to, there's not been any spread of this outside of the first, secondary contact people that were on board the cruise line. So there's not been like the husband or wife or the child of someone on the cruise line having symptoms and being positive yet. Then we have this other article here, state trooper guards and daily fever checks. Some hantavirus cruise ship passengers go home. Now this is talking about the same thing, but in this article, it's saying something about them being watched or monitored. The 5 passengers were permitted to leave under one condition: they have to stay home. No quick runs for takeout or trips to the grocery store for the second half of the virus's full 42-day quarantine, set to end June 22nd. The CDC said all of the passengers who are asymptomatic and haven't tested positive for the Andes hantavirus were given the option to leave Monday. Those who chose to stay can finish their 42-day quarantine at the National Quarantine Unit in Omaha, Nebraska. They came to get me in my room at 6 a.m. One passenger, a 30-year-old New York resident who did not want to be identified because he feared public backlash, said Monday. The passenger, who said he remains asymptomatic, was given a KN95 mask and driven directly to a private plane. Now, do you remember the gear that they were wearing when they originally took them from the cruise ship and put them onto planes and stuff like that, and then flew them to Nebraska. Remember the full Outbreak gear, the full uniform, plastic everywhere, the full mask, respirator? Well, here it's saying they just have a KN95 mask. Just a little mask on their face. I hope this isn't something being done on purpose. And then it also says that he had medical staff on board with him, and that the healthcare workers took his blood pressure throughout the flight and were kind of monitoring him, and then also that there was a motorcade of emergency vehicles to escort him home. So it does seem that there are some measures in place, but they're really trying to like you're going home, right? Now, the real question is, are they going to make him stay home? And then even if you have, like, say, food delivery, for example, are you going to be able to keep the person delivering the food safe? I would assume if they drop it outside the house and then they just leave and then he goes and gets it or someone else gets it for him, should be fine, right? But this is a situation where we thought that this was going to be basically a set quarantine until they're all clear after that 6 to 8 week incubation period. But it's looking like, for whatever reason, they let them go early. In this case, it looks like 4 or 5 weeks early. So they're going to be at home, they're going to be monitored, and we'll just hope that everything goes well. But as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this around. If you want to help out the channel, there are links down in the description. And I'll see you on the next one.